Welcome to Teacher Tom Hanoi. This is a mock IELTS listening exam. Both the exam paper and the answer sheet are available to download in the video description below. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. I repeat, all the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Good luck. Now turn to Part 1. Part 1.
You will hear a woman reporting a theft to an officer in a police station. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning. What can I do for you?
I want to report a theft. I had some things stolen out of my bag yesterday.
I'm sorry to hear that. Right, so I'll need to take a few details. Can I start with your name?
Louise Taylor.
Okay, thank you. And are you resident in the UK?
No, I'm actually Canadian, though my mother was British.
And your date of birth?
December 14th, 1977.
So you're just visiting this country?
That's right. I come over most summers on business. I'm an interior designer, and I come over to buy old furniture. Antiques, you know? There are some really lovely things around here, but you need to get out to the small towns. I've had a really good trip this year, until this happened.
Okay. So you've been here quite a while?
Yes, I'm here for 2 months. I go back next week.
So, may I ask where you're staying now?
Well, at present, I've got a place at Park Apartments. That's on King Street. I was staying at the Riverside Apartments on the same street, but the apartment there was only available for 6 weeks, so I had to find another one.
Okay. And the apartment number?
15.
Right. Now, I need to take some details of the theft. So, you said you had some things stolen out of your bag?
That's right.
And were you actually carrying the bag when the theft took place?
Yes. I really can't understand it. I had my backpack on, and I went into a supermarket to buy a few things, and when I opened it up, my wallet wasn't there.
And what did your wallet have in it?
Well, fortunately, I don't keep my credit cards in that wallet. I keep them with my passport in an inside compartment in my backpack, but there was quite a bit of cash there, about £250 sterling, I should think. I withdrew £300 from my account yesterday, but I did a bit of shopping, so I must have already spent about £50 of that.
Okay.
At first I thought, oh, I must have left the wallet back in the apartment. But then I realized my phone had gone as well. It was only a week old, and that's when I realized I'd been robbed. Anyway, at least they didn't take the keys to my rental car.
Yes.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen carefully and answer questions 6 to 10.
So, you say the theft occurred yesterday?
Yes.
So that was September the 10th? And do you have any idea at all of where or when the things might possibly have been stolen?
Well, at first I couldn't believe it because the bag had been on my back ever since I left the apartment after lunch. It's just a small backpack, but I generally use it when I'm traveling because it seems safer than a handbag. Anyway, I met up with a friend, and we spent a couple of hours in the museum. But I do remember that as we were leaving there, at about 4 o'clock, a group of young boys ran up to us, and they were really crowding round us, and they were asking us what time it was. Then, all of a sudden, they ran off.
Can you remember anything about them?
The one who did most of the talking was wearing a T-shirt with a picture of something. Let's see. A tiger.
Right. Any idea of how old he might have been?
Around 12 years old?
And can you remember anything else about his appearance?
Not much. He was quite thin.
Color of hair?
I do remember that. He was blonde. All the others were dark-haired.
And any details of the others?
Not really. They came and went so quickly.
Right. So what I'm going to do now is give you a crime reference number so you can contact your insurance company. So this is 10 digits. 87954 82361.
Thank you. So, should I contact...
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 30 seconds to review your answers to Part 1. Now turn to Part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a talk for teachers about the Holylands Museum and Education Centre. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
It's nice to see so many of you here. I'm going to tell you something about Holylands, our facilities and activities, and the exhibitions we have coming up. I hope you'll find it interesting and bring your pupils along. For most of what we have to offer here, you can just turn up with your party. I'm pleased to say that recent work has meant that the whole centre is prepared for blind visitors. There are a couple of activities where we ask you to book a week in advance. We only have artists that you can watch painting at certain times, so we need notice of your coming for that. The other activity, requiring at least 7 days' notice, is the drama workshop. Again, it's a question of organising the staff at this end. But the video you work yourself, and so that's available any time. Another activity where you need to think ahead is the garden sculpture experience. But that's a question of the weather, which of course we can't control. Speaking of weather, we run a reduced range of facilities in the winter months. While the cafe and the shop provide welcome shelter from the cold and rain, I'm afraid our artist in residence scheme isn't run in the winter, so the studio is closed then. And the animals in the mini-zoo are kept indoors for warmth during the cold months, so that doesn't operate either. The adventure playground does, though make sure the children are wrapped up well. OK, now we run a programme of exhibitions through the year, so I'll tell you about the next few. Our current exhibition, Local Lives, ends on the 26th of August, and then one called History in Pictures starts on the 28th of August. This includes all sorts of objects and experiences from the past, such as farm machinery and some cars. We're sure children will love the chance to have a ride on an old bus. Next, we're running a show called People at Work, and this will open on the 19th of September. There will be pictures and videos depicting all sorts of jobs, from coal mining to flying planes. And there's a careers advice service available for everyone to consult. Following on from that show, we're putting on an exhibition called Land from Air. This starts on the 11th of November and includes hundreds of aerial photographs. A competition accompanies the show with the exciting prize of a balloon trip for two. So we hope to see you at least one of the exhibitions.
Before you hear the next part of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 18 to 20.
Now, the area occupied by Hollylands is rather large, and we don't want people to get lost, so I'll just give you a few pointers to help you orientate yourselves. So, whether you come by car or bicycle, you'll come in from the road. Cars then park to the left through the gates into the car park, and bikes to the right through the gates opposite. Cyclists in particular might be feeling thirsty at this point, and you can get a drink from the machine at the end of the bike park, halfway to the museum entrance. You can enjoy your drink in the picnic area, which is opposite the car park. For anyone who doesn't have a mobile phone, there are payphones at the far end of the picnic area. Over at the opposite end of the picnic area, across the path, are the toilets. Next to them, and just to the right of the entrance to the main museum, is the first aid room, which we hope you won't need, but it's there in case you do. If you have any queries, please go to the manager's office, which is behind the picnic area. And last but not least, you'll need to buy your tickets or show your group pass to the ticket office on the left of the museum entrance. OK, I'll pause there. Are there any questions at this point?
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to review your answers to Part 2. Now turn to Part 3. Part 3.
You will hear a student called Russ consulting his tutor on a presentation he is preparing on nanotechnology. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Come in, Russ.
Thank you.
Now, you wanted to consult me about your class presentation on nanotechnology. You're due to give it next week, aren't you?
That's right, and I'm really struggling. I chose the topic because I didn't know much about it and wanted to learn more, but now I've read so much about it, in a way there's too much to say. I could talk for much longer than the 20 minutes I've been allocated. Should I assume the other students don't know much and give them a kind of general introduction? Or should I try and make them share my fascination with a particular aspect?
You could do either, but you'll need to have it clear in your own mind.
Then I think I'll give an overview.
OK. Now, one way of approaching this is to work through developments in chronological order.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, you could talk about the numerous ways nanotechnology is being applied.
You mean things like thin films on camera displays to make them water repellent and additives to make motorcycle helmets stronger and lighter?
Exactly. Or another way would be to focus on its impact in one particular area, say medicine or space exploration.
That would make it easier to focus. Perhaps I should do that.
I think that would be a good idea.
Right. How important is it to include slides in the presentation?
They aren't essential by any means, and there's a danger of tailoring what you say to fit whatever slides you can find. While it can be good to include slides, you could end up spending too long looking for suitable ones. You might find it better to leave them out.
I see. Another thing I was wondering about was how to start. I know presentations often begin with, first I'm going to talk about this, and then I'll talk about that. But I thought about asking the audience what they know about nanotechnology.
That would be fine if you had an hour or two for the presentation, but you might find that you can't do anything with the answers you get, and it simply eats into the short time that's available.
So maybe I should mention a particular way that nanotechnology is used to focus people's attention.
That sounds sensible.
What do you think I should do next? I really have to plan the presentation today and tomorrow.
Well, initially, I think you should ignore all the notes you've made, take a small piece of paper and write a single short sentence that ties together the whole presentation. It can be something as simple as, nanotechnology is already improving our lives. Then start planning the content around that. You can always modify that sentence later if you need to.
OK.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 26 to 30.
OK, now let's think about actually giving the presentation. You've only given one before, if I remember correctly, about an experiment you'd been involved in.
That's right. It was pretty rubbish.
Let's say it was better in some respects than in others. With regard to the structure, I felt that you ended rather abruptly, without rounding it off. Be careful not to do that in next week's presentation.
OK.
And you made very little eye contact with the audience because you were looking down at your notes most of the time. You need to be looking at the audience and only occasionally glancing at your notes. Your body language was a little odd. Every time you showed a slide, you turned your back on the audience so you could look at it. You should have been looking at your laptop. And you kept scratching your head, so I found myself wondering when you were next going to do that, instead of listening to what you were saying.
Oh dear. What did you think of the language? I knew that not everyone was familiar with the subject, so I tried to make it as simple as I could.
Yes, that came across. You used a few words that are specific to the field, but you always explained what they meant, so the audience wouldn't have had any difficulty understanding.
Uh-huh.
I must say, the handouts you prepared were well thought out. They were a good summary of your presentation, which people would have been able to refer to later on. So well done on that.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that helps you with next week's presentation.
Yes, it will. Thanks a lot.
I'll look forward to seeing a big improvement then.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to review your answers to Part 3. Now turn to Part 4. Part 4.
You will hear a talk about waste and waste treatment. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 37. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 37.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'll be talking about the issue of waste, which has become an immense problem in today's society. We face huge challenges in terms of reducing its creation in the first place, and then in dealing with it when it has been created. Now, the model of nature would be our ideal, a completely cyclical system in which no excess waste is generated that can't be processed by itself. However, we humans have proved, despite our apparent intelligence and ingenuity, quite incapable of achieving this. Where did it all go wrong? We have evidence that in ancient Greece and Rome, governments operated municipal waste collection, and a huge Stone Age mound was identified some years ago in Norway as waste disposal. So we can see that people have been generating waste for a very long time indeed. However, during the Dark Ages, sophisticated municipal waste processing disappeared. The medieval answer to waste was to throw it out of the window. But this waste, apart from broken pottery and a few metal objects, was largely organic. This meant, of course, that it was quickly absorbed into the environment by the natural processes of decay. However, many concerned people, such as doctors, claim that this created health problems, although it wasn't until science produced convincing evidence of the connection between rubbish and disease that governments began to see the importance of dealing with the problem effectively. Unfortunately, their response has remained slower than the generation of waste. It is very hard to deal with waste that won't melt into the environment, as so many of our modern consumer goods won't. And that's why the invention of plastic has caused the worst headache for the environment. It's more than nature can deal with. In order to address the root of the problem of waste, we need to think about what has made the quantity of waste accelerate in growth. I'd identify three main reasons. As many countries became industrialized, we saw the advent of mass manufacturing. This has been enormously damaging, as it has greatly increased the amount of things on the planet's surface which don't go away by themselves. Closely related to this is packaging, necessary for transporting things around the world, but then extremely difficult to get rid of properly. And a third aspect to the problem has been disposable goods. We have become accustomed to so many things being to use and then discard that we find it hard to imagine life without them. And yet we spare little thought for where they go when we do discard them.
Before you hear the final part of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 38 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 38 to 40.
Right now, let's move on from where all this waste comes from to what is done with it all now it's here. Different countries deal with waste differently. Of course, each country also changes what it does, so the figures for waste treatment I've got here are likely to change in the future. Let's look at municipal solid waste, or MSW. MSW is important to consider because it's effectively a measurement of consumerism, how much waste people produce that goes beyond the absolute basic requirements in life to eat and drink. One of the main ways of dealing with MSW is incineration, burning it. This is adopted variously around the world. The UK burns relatively little waste, as does the US, while Denmark burns about half of all waste, and Japan uses this method for as much as 3/4. These are broad brushstrokes, of course, because an important issue is how efficient and clean the burning process is. Another major form of waste treatment is using landfill sites, basically burying the waste in the earth. Currently, this method is the dominant process used in the UK at over 80%, and is also heavily used in Germany and in the US, while densely populated and mountainous countries, such as Switzerland and Japan, dispose of relatively little this way. A third, and much better way of dealing with waste is to recycle it, turning it back into more things we need. It must be said that much depends here on whether further waste is generated by the recycling processes themselves. The UK and Japan have rather poor records in recycling, while Switzerland tops the table in this respect, and reasonably impressive levels are achieved by Denmark and Germany. I really hope that if we all gathered here again 10 years from now, these figures would be much higher. Time and a lot of effort will tell.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 30 seconds to review your answers to Part 4. That is the end of the mock IELTS listening exam. You now have 10 minutes to review and transfer your answers from the exam paper to the answer sheet provided. Thank you for your attention. Let us know in the comments what score you got. Also,